Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. Now, we've all heard about entitled Karen customers, but have you ever encountered an entitled Karen boss? Trust me, working for a Karen can be even worse than dealing with one as a customer. But add picky customers in the restaurant industry to the mix, and it becomes an absolute nightmare. I learned this the hard way, thanks to a certain boss from hell. But before I delve into the horror story of my experience, let me provide some background context. A few years ago, during my college days, I found a job at a local mom and pop pizza shop. It was a cozy place that served delicious pizza, sandwiches, and salads. The owners, a kind-hearted couple in their 50s, had opened the restaurant as a retirement project and a legacy to pass on to their children. They were genuinely sweet and ran the business with family values in mind. However, things took a turn for the worse when they hired a new manager, Karen. She turned out to be one of the worst Karens I had ever encountered. Initially, everything seemed fine. I even made a few friends among the staff. The crew was great, the owners were delightful, and Karen appeared to be competent. But then, everything changed. A couple of months into my job, our POS system underwent an update, which required resetting our PIN numbers for clocking in and out. Unfortunately, I couldn't reset mine. I reported the issue to Karen, and she assured me that it was a system error and that she had already submitted a ticket to resolve it. In the meantime, she advised me to write down my working hours, and she would manually enter them later. Days turned into weeks, and I still couldn't fix my PIN number. Luckily, I managed to keep track of my hours using my phone. When payday arrived, my heart sank as I discovered that my paycheck reflected a meager amount of work. Panic gripped me. I was a college student in dire need of every penny. The following day, with Karen absent, I approached one of the shift leaders and discovered that her paycheck was also way below what it should have been. It turned out that several of us were facing the same issue. Concerned, we messaged Karen, seeking an explanation. Perhaps it was a POS system glitch, but if she manually added our hours, there shouldn't have been a problem, right? But that's when the entitlement revealed itself. Days went by, and those of us missing part or all of our paychecks received no resolution. Frustrated, we decided to inform the owners. They acted swiftly, and it turned out that the correct hours were recorded in the system, but the payroll section failed to display them. Strangely enough, one person had received a full paycheck, Karen. Suspicion loomed over her. As it turned out, we also collected cash tips each day. On average, we each received about $10 per day after splitting the tips. Additionally, we had credit card tips, which were a welcome addition. However, one day, when I requested my tips from Karen, she casually replied, "Sorry, there were no tips today." This response raised my eyebrows. We always had at least some cash tips, so why the sudden disappearance? I didn't confront her at the time, but a conversation with a close friend and shift leader shed light on Karen's deceit. My friend had witnessed Karen taking money from the tip jar before, but since she sometimes distributed the tips before the night shift ended, my friend didn't initially suspect anything. However, that day, she didn't receive any tips, even though she had seen Karen take them. Determined to uncover the truth, we embarked on a secret investigation. One day, when Karen carelessly left the office door open while going to the bank, we seized the opportunity. Inside, we found our time cards displayed on the computer screen, and it was evident that Karen had tampered with them. The adjusted hours were significantly lower than our actual working hours. She was essentially robbing us of our rightful pay. To make matters worse, my friend, with her insight as a shift leader, noticed that Karen had seemingly transferred the hours she stole from us to her own records. The system appeared intact because the overall adjusted hours matched our clock-in times. It was a cleverly disguised scam, making us practically work for free. We couldn't let this injustice continue. Armed with photographic evidence of Karen stealing our tips and manipulating our time cards, we reported her to the labor board and made the unanimous decision to stop showing up for work. Naturally, Karen wasn't pleased. She retaliated by sending a string of vile text messages to all of us, those who had walked out. She accused us of trying to tarnish her reputation and labeled us as terrible employees. Strangely enough, she even went as far as filing a police report against my coworker and me, accusing us of hacking the computer and editing the time cards. It was a baseless accusation, of course, as there was no evidence to support her claims. In the end, I felt sorry for the owners because the business eventually shut down. They sent each of us gift cards worth $250 as an apology, though I knew it was a meager compensation considering the wages many of us had lost. I prefer to believe that the owners were naive and unknowingly trusted the wrong person. They did, however, send us a heartfelt apology letter. The next one is a pro-revenge story. Backstory: my neighbor, whom we will call David, not real name, and my other neighbor, whom we will call Karen, not real name, often got into arguments about who owns what part of the property. They live right next to each other, so this is understandable. Karen was known for being a Karen, so this explains a lot. Karen had just gotten engaged to her boyfriend, whom we will call Kyle, not real name, who went over to her house a lot, like every other day, and would spend the night there. We saw his car parked there a lot. Kyle would park his car in front of David's lawn because Karen is part of a large family, so they have many cars. Therefore, there is no room in the driveway. David recently got a new camper, one of those massive ones that are practically buses. They needed a place to park it because they didn't feel comfortable leaving it in a public place, but Kyle's car was there. Around this same time, news was spreading around my neighborhood that Kyle and Karen had gotten married. Kyle moved in with Karen and started using the front of David's lawn as his assigned parking spot. He was told that it was part of her property because Karen was a dummy-dumb and didn't understand that property lines exist. There was an incident in the past with a bench and another with a few trees. Eventually, David got tired of Kyle parking where they wanted to park their camper. He had been having to park it down the road in the public camper places or whatever they are called. He began plotting his revenge. His plan was to park the camper in front of Kyle's car so that he would have to pull out backwards. This way, he would have to struggle to get his car out between one of Karen's siblings' cars and the camper. When this plan happened, Kyle came running up to David's door and began shouting the usual, "I'm calling the cops," and whatnot. When David didn't answer, he tried to inch his way out. He ended up bumping into the car behind him and putting a good-sized dent in it. He instantly ran up to Karen's sibling and began apologizing and blamed it on David. Now Karen's entire family was mad at David. David said he saw this through the window and was laughing hysterically. Karen actually managed to think logically for once and blamed it on Kyle, but it was okay and insurance will cover it or something like that. Kyle began going off on Karen about how insurance would charge him for the damage, so they ended up fighting about insurance or whatever. This whole thing unraveled outside David's house, so he listened in through the open window. They then came up to his house. David answered the door, and all of them but Karen instantly started going off about how he caused a dent in Karen's sibling's car. He said that Kyle's car was parked on his property and that he needed to park his camper somewhere. He dug out the property line drawing or whatever and showed them all. Karen was pissed. Karen said that he had drawn those lines himself and that the actual lines were farther to the left, giving her more property, and expanding past where Kyle was parked. Keep in mind, Kyle was parked by the windows of David's house, clearly on David's property. At this point, I could hear yelling from a few houses down and walked over to listen for that sweet, sweet internet karma. Karen ended up calling the cops because David was disturbing the entire neighborhood. 2 cops showed up in a car and instantly sided with David after reviewing the property lines. Karen was fined over $700 for misusing cops. Kyle ended up having to pay $900 for the damages done to the other car. Apparently he broke part of the engine or something. That's not all. Karen and Kyle ended up divorcing because Karen lied to him and said he was on her property, and Karen saying that it was her house, so she could lie if she wanted, and other things of the sort. The next one is a petty revenge story. I live in a semi-detached house and share a driveway. When I first moved in, an older British couple lived next door. I got along great with them. Then the wife passed away, and the husband moved to an apartment, selling the house to someone I'll call Cece. Initially, there were no issues with Cece, but sometimes she did things that annoyed me. However, for the most part, I was able to ignore her and her extended family. On one occasion, I found the roof of my spouse's car dented after it was left on the street. On another occasion, I discovered damage to my spouse's car, and the easiest explanation was if someone backed out of Cece's driveway without looking. I didn't have any firm evidence, just circumstantial evidence. So I installed a camera, no audio, just video, on my garage, overlooking the shared driveway and the street. I then went and informed all my neighbors about the car damage and the new camera. Nobody expressed any concerns, and nobody admitted to causing the damage. By the end of the following week, Cece listed her house for sale, and it sold quickly, bringing in a new neighbor. Now, Cece was a realtor, and should have known the law about vacating her old house. However, she was still making trips with her belongings long after the new owner arrived. Cece ended up suing the new owner because she had left behind items that she was trying to retrieve. One morning, as I was leaving for work, I noticed legal papers on the windshield of the new owner's car. So I made a point of asking about them. That's when I learned about all the drama and ongoing issues. The new owner mentioned that they would have to document everything to defend themselves in court. This is where the petty revenge came in. I asked if the new neighbor wanted video footage. I provided footage of multiple loads of furniture being moved past the deadline. I also provided footage of Cece's sister sneaking across my property to try and serve the new neighbor, and then illegally leaving the paperwork on the car. Additionally, I provided footage of Cece randomly driving by at different times. With the footage I provided, the case was awarded to my new neighbor, who had to counter-sue Cece. The next one is an entitled People Story. For a bit of background information before I share this short story, my mother and I went to Pennsylvania to visit my sister for about a week, as we haven't seen each other in person for over 4 years. During one of the last couple of days of our visit, my mother, my sister, one of her friends who she's living with, and I went to a local restaurant that she looked up via Google Maps as we were looking to try eating at someplace new. Now, I don't remember the exact name of the restaurant, but I do know that it's on the riverside and it has tequila in its name. Now, on to the story. We arrived at the restaurant and parked in a parking lot across the street from the establishment, and we headed inside. As we were heading in, we noticed that the restaurant is packed with lots of customers, and the place looks to be understaffed. There didn't seem to be that many waiters, waitresses on duty, but all 4 of us can tell that they are giving it their all to serve all these people, despite the circumstances. One thing I was surprised about was that we were able to be seated so quickly, even if the place looks packed to the brim. So we sat down, ordered an appetizer, and waited patiently for it to arrive. During this time, we chatted about some personal things that aren't worth sharing, and when our appetizer arrived, the waitress forgot to give us the cheese sauce that would normally come with our fries. I politely pointed this out to her after she dropped off our food. She apologized, and she went back to the kitchen to get our cheese sauce. No big deal, as from what we can tell, our waitress is serving about 7 tables total, including ours. Eventually, we got our cheese sauce for our appetizer, and then ordered our main meals. My mom got a baked potato with pork and BBQ sauce inside the potato that was the size of my head. My sister got a sandwich, I think. I can't remember for sure. And some fries. My sister's friend got something else that I can't recall, and I got myself a pepperoni calzone. Our food arrived, and everyone's food was correct, except mine. My calzone had ham or salami in it, which is something I don't like. So I politely informed our waitress that my order was wrong and told her what was wrong with it. She apologized, and I told her it wasn't a big deal. She offered to take the calzone back and have the cooks remake it, which I had her do. All seemed good, despite the mistakes that were made so far. Considering everything that was going on, dealing with a restaurant that was packed with hungry people and being short-handed, our waitress was handling things like a champ, until my mom and sister overheard an entitled Karen at a table next to us. I didn't hear the conversation myself, as I was staring off into space, waiting for my food to be remade, which by the time it was remade, it was done properly, which was nice. From what I heard Mom and my sister mention as they were talking to each other, this Karen was complaining about how the food was terrible, the service was sloppy, and how they were going to complain to our waitress's manager about their slow, piss-poor service. As Mom and my sister were conversing, my sister's friend joined in the conversation as well to offer her own input, and as they were talking and taking all this information in, I agreed with everyone in my party that this Karen is just being entitled, and we were practically singing our waitress's praises as she worked her butt off serving our table, plus several others at the same time. In the end, when we were ready to receive our check and leave, we told our waitress that she did an excellent job that evening, thanked her for all of her hard work, and we gave her a very generous tip. I think we ended up tipping her $50 that evening, but I could be wrong about that amount. Regardless, we gave her a really good tip, and I strongly believe that we raised her spirits at least a little bit, which felt really good. My sister also offered to stand up for this waitress if she were to receive a complaint from her manager, shift leader, or whoever her boss is, thanks to this entitled Karen. Overall, the food was delicious, and the service was top-notch. If Mom and I were to go back to PA again, we'll definitely revisit this restaurant and hopefully not encounter any more Karens who can't appreciate good customer service, even if it's being served right in front of their face. The next one is an entitled Parents Story. I have an upcoming update post to make soon, but for now, Here's one of my past issues with my parents that I talked about during the family intervention not too long ago. Back when I was still a kid, it was very hard for anything to be exclusively mine. And as my brother got older, he craved money for things above all else. He and I both got allowances, equal allowances. So that was sort of fair. I say sort of because he didn't have to do chores for his while I did. But that's in the past now because my brother is now having to do all those chores for nothing. My brother always wanted more money though, whether he spent it or not. He loved having new things, but sometimes he'd just save the money instead. Which is odd because you'd think he was the kind of kid who'd splurge his savings on the first thing he wants. My brother and I both got allowances of about $25 a month, and I was pretty thankful for it. I usually saved most of my money though, but my brother always wanted more. One day as a teenager, I came home to find my room had been ransacked, and the only thing gone was my money. I had hidden it to try and keep it from my brother because, well, obvious reasons if you readers know what my brother is like by now. I thought I'd hidden it well, but he found it anyway. My mom was home when he did it too, and she acted like she didn't even notice. But there's no way she could not have heard him tearing my room up. I called her out on that during the intervention, and she just cried and made excuses about my brother being special until other family members told her to shut up and own up to it. My room was on the first floor right near the living room. My door was completely in view of the couch, and when I pointed this out back then, my mom just made the, "but he's special, he's not like you," excuse for my brother. I said I wanted the money back, and my mom just made more excuses. And my dad did too when he got home later. So yeah, excuses then and now. Back then, I did eventually get that money back because I refused to let it go. I heard my brother screaming as they took the money out of his piggy bank and gave it back to me. And they had the most disappointed looks on their faces, like I'd just robbed my brother even though he'd robbed me. But they couldn't tell me off because I wasn't in the wrong, and they knew it. I don't imagine many kids getting into the kind of situations where they are more right about something than their parents very often. A few months later, the whole situation repeated. My brother ransacked my room again and stole the money I'd hidden. Again. That time my parents didn't want to do anything about it, and basically said that they couldn't bear to see my brother so disappointed from taking his money. I reminded them that stolen money wasn't his money, and it was really crappy that they were just sitting back and letting that happen. My dad yelled at me to go to my room for saying that. So the next day I rode my bike to my aunt's house and told her everything. She came back home with me and asked my parents if they really let my brother steal from me and did nothing about it. My mom just started whining that my brother has special needs, and she didn't want to make him cry again, and my dad backed her up. My aunt just gave them both that narrow-eyed look and reminded them they have 2 sons, and my feelings mattered too. And what they were doing was very wrong. And it meant that my brother would never respect boundaries, and would think he can always get away with stealing when he gets older. My aunt asked me openly how much my brother took. I stated the number, which at the time was everything I had, save for the few bucks in my wallet. My aunt gave my parents an expectant glare. My parents tried making a few more excuses, but my aunt had a counter for each one. Finally, my parents went into my brother's room, and a moment later, my brother was screaming. My parents came back with all of the money my brother took and practically threw it at me for making my brother cry. My aunt then told them off for acting that way when I'd done nothing wrong, and they picked up all of the money they'd thrown at me and gave a pretty forced apology. My aunt said that she'd be severely disappointed in them if they let this situation repeat. And before she left, my aunt offered for me to hide my money at her house in a lockbox she had. I took her up on that and started keeping my savings over there. My brother ended up ransacking my room 2 more times looking for money. But I was keeping every cent I had at my aunt's house. My parents actually asked me where I'd hidden it, and I refused to tell. Then I asked why they wanted to know so badly anyway, and my dad instantly got defensive about it. My mom calmed him down, and they didn't ask again. Since he couldn't find my money in my room, my brother figured I must have hidden it somewhere else. So he started tearing the house apart, one room after another. And who was made to clean up the mess? Why, yours truly, of course. My parents started to blame me for the whole situation, but when I asked how I was at fault for not letting my brother steal from me, their only counter was that my brother had special needs. I swear they used that line with me thousands of times. That was something else I heavily berated my parents for in the family intervention. The final straw came when my brother ransacked our parents' bedroom. My parents had a small suitcase safe that they kept some cash in, and my brother locked himself in their room, then took the whole safe and started bashing it around on stuff to try and get it open because he couldn't find the keys. By the time my parents were able to get the door open by breaking it open, My brother had destroyed the room, and he never got that safe open. He just sat on the floor clutching it and crying about the money inside it. My dad was so angry that he turned red, and he actually started yelling at my brother and grounded him. A very rare sight for me to see back then indeed. Then my parents forced my brother to help clean up the mess. After that, my brother never ransacked mine or my parents' rooms looking for money again. But he'd still go rooting around every time he got an idea where my savings might be. So I started acting like I was giving hints by repeatedly going into certain places while he was watching. He ransacked the backyard shed, dug a bunch of holes in the yard and under the back porch, and even ransacked the attic. My parents really hit their breaking point with the attic and grounded my brother again. They never figured out I led him on either. My parents did eventually figure out I was keeping my money at my aunt's house, and they didn't argue with my reasoning for doing it. But either my brother overheard or one of them spilled the beans to him because the next time we visited my aunt, my brother tried to hunt for the money, but my aunt yelled at him to stop, and my brother would just sit on the floor and cry. This happened a few times, and my aunt bluntly stated she'd press charges for any damages if my brother ransacked anything, and also kept a digital camera on hand to record anything if need be. My parents heavily scolded my brother to stop looking for my money. It wasn't his, and he can't have it. Cue more screaming and crying that he wants it like a 3-year-old, even though he was 7 at the time. Then my brother said he didn't want to go to Auntie's house anymore, so my parents visited less. My aunt visited us a lot more than we visited her anyway. I was pretty much able to keep my money away from my brother until after I moved out. He's never managed to steal cash from me again. His classmates at school were another story. He was caught looking through the backpacks of other kids many times, and he was forced to return stolen stuff and then sent home, where he'd cry to mom and dad, who then tried to have words with the school, who berated them for letting my brother think what he was doing was okay. They had to teach my brother that it's not okay to go through other people's stuff, and I actually heard him say, "But I wanted what they had," a few times. This excuse got used again when my brother stole an envelope with birthday money from a cousin during their birthday party. He tried to stuff it in his shirt and walk out with it later, but the cousin noticed it was missing, and I suspected my brother right away and pointed everyone to him. He ended up crying and thrashing when my dad found the envelope hidden in his shirt. We left that party early. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.